Hello and welcome to the New York Empire podcast presented by Greatest Ultimate Bag. I'm Dan Hilton and he's Matt Pippin Auletta. And today we're reviewing the 20-17 win, Week 7 win over the Atlanta Hustle for the New York Empire that moves them to 7-0 on the season and 25 straight home wins for the New York Empire at Joseph F. Facina Field. Matt, not only hello, welcome to another day where we're talking about an Empire win. And it wasn't necessarily of course because I was going into this game and I'm looking at the roster, especially with Freistadter and Langdon being questionable before the game. Jakeem Polk, the same thing, questionable before the game. All three get inserted in the 20 prior to game time as they're warming up. And I'm looking at these 20s and I'm saying this might be, the tallest two 20s I've ever seen looking across from each other, at least, and two of the most talented 20s that I've ever seen with name recognition and what we know that those 20 players on each team are capable of. It was one of the deepest rosters all around for both teams that I've ever seen.
Yeah, there's certainly no lack of stars. We have some Callahan winners. We have MVPs. We have all AUDL selections, all-time leading goal scorers, 2, 3, and 4, all-time block leaders, obviously, in the draw. So, yeah, it was a star-studded affair.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, you would have said you had two of the top 3 MVP candidates with Babbitt and Holzmeier as well, but Holzmeier has taken a bit of a step back since that one. I don't think the game against the Empire is going to help his MVP case too much, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Because I want to ask you, do you want to start kind of with the Empire O-line and what they did right, we'll say, or do you want to start with the Empire D-line?
I think the O-line really takes center stage here. They finally got a game where there were no adverse weather conditions. It looked pristine and beautiful and calm. And as a result, Ryan Osgard looks like a surgeon out there. He's hitting Lithio and Babbitt all over the place. Even Lithio is uncorking like routine 40-yard hammers out of those double teams. Every throw looked like it went pretty much where they wanted it to, with very few exceptions. The offense was top notch.
Well, yeah, they were not broken until the 2:32 mark in the third, and Atlanta wound up getting 3 breaks. They kept themselves in the game by outscoring the Empire 4-3 in the fourth. They were tied 6-6 as far as trading back and forth, but because they'd gone into the half down 11-7, that was the big problem there. And there were, I felt like, stats were pretty bonkers for Osgar. 9 assists, 595 total yards, a +8. Lithio had, not to say a quiet 5 goals, but he was that release valve in the end zone, because when I say all the attention, so for full discretion, I was on the sideline for that game with the 3 gentlemen, Evan Lippler and Charlie Eisenhood and Brian Dills were up in the booth. So I was on the sideline right at midfield, so very close to all the action. And I can tell you that the whole focus of that zone, and they did run different zones. It was a 1-3-3 at times. It was I don't know if it's necessarily a 1-3-3 more than it was a 2-3-2, I guess it was more often. But regardless of what the zone was, there was a big emphasis on trying to keep Babbitt almost in the middle space. Don't let him come back as a handler, because that's kind of what DC, they'll say, failed to do. Once he got in that handler space, he's just so fast and so quick. Even if he begins in the handler space, dishes off to somebody, then that actually gives him like a runaway train. He has too much time and space then to get into the end zone from the handler space. So that didn't really help. So they tried with their zone to keep him in the middle part of the field where they felt like he could do the least damage. And that meant that Lithio was consistently in the pockets behind against that 2-3-2, just finding that space in between the two bigs, who again had to worry about Babbitt for so much. And then Babbitt ended the day with 4 goals, 1 assist, a +4, but also some major highlights. And it goes back to the moments thing where Callahan winner Justin Burnett, I want to give him credit. He kind of kept Jack quiet relatively, but then that Jack second effort catch was maybe the play of the game even. And that's what gave the Empire a 5-point lead. So even though Burnett did a wonderful job on Jack Williams, you feel like he fought made Jack fight for everything. And yet Jack still has this backbreaker play and still it feels like he's still deciding the game in this one moment against you. And that's what happens. Babbitt, that grab in the second quarter for Mike Kabira, which is insane as well. That one-handed catch where Kabira had all the bit of positioning. He did. He got the positioning right. He went behind him. He knew that being Kabira, he set himself up perfectly to grab it at the highest point. And it did not matter because Babbitt's highest point is higher than your highest point.
Yeah, it's a shame because Atlanta, they got what they wanted on a few of those plays. They were hucks that they could actually contest, and Babbitt does Babbitt things. There's not a lot you can do there when he goes up and, I don't know, 12, 13, 14, 15 feet, maybe only 11, but it feels like it's the sky is the limit.
Mm.
And the Burnett on jack play, it's like, you got the D. That's, you got exactly what you wanted there. And the Empire still come away with a goal. It's like, there's only so much you can do when the best stars in the game make plays like they're the best stars in the game.
Well, yeah, and again, I also think that, as you mentioned at the start, the conditions for the Atlanta zone didn't mesh with how good the Empire are, and they did not make a mistake. I mean, they had the same number, or they had less turnovers, rather, that being the Empire O, from that game than in totality we saw from basically the entire, or just the handlers for the Atlanta Hustle in the game. So yeah, with the Empire O only having one turnover in that entire first half, I mean, you have a game plan, that being Atlanta. You try your best to do what you need to do, and then if they don't make mistakes, if the Empire O don't make mistakes, there's nothing you can do, because transitioning to that D a little bit. I mean, in totality, as much as Osgar, again, he'll get the credit on the stats, and Lithio and Babbitt and the stats and stuff. But to me, the unrelenting pressure of that Empire D line winds up continuing to be the difference in every one of these games. I mean, again, the sideline was a good spot for me to really appreciate just not even the physicality, but the amount of pressure from the first whistle until the very end of the game. Marquez and Josue on Austin Taylor, just making him work for every little bit of space. And yes, he ended with 4 goals, great, but I mean, they kept basically everybody else for Atlanta out of the end zone, other than Austin Taylor, who found himself in that pocket of space. Lay had an assist and a block and 3 turnovers. Austin Taylor, as I said, had 4 goals, but he had 0 assists and 2 turnovers. Dean Ramsey only had 1 goal and 39 total yards, while playing 6 points over on O and 7 points on D. And New York's defense held Holzmeier to 1 goal and 1 assist and 0 blocks, even though he had 572 total yards, second overall for everybody in the game, or second only to Oscar, I should say. But yet he was still unable to truly affect the game with counting stats, and which is all really what he's been doing. He's just racking up blocks, racking up goals, racking up assists. That's what he's been doing this year. But yeah, I mean, so much credit goes again to Katz and Kat and Ethan on Bobby Lay, and then Antoine and Oliver Chartok on Holzmeier, and then Yacht and Antoine on Freystetter was huge. Antoine just, again, unrelenting on Freystetter, not allowing him, who knows if he was 100%. I know, you and I are in our 30s, so once you get to your 30s, 70% sometimes feels like 50%. But I mean, he looked healthy to me, that being Freystetter. I watched the warm up. He looked fine. He was moving well. But yeah, Antoine and Yacht just running him around. And then there were points where Yacht was even switched on to Matt Smith and just making Matt Smith. I mean, as obviously Smith has a bit of a speed advantage on those unders, but Yacht just made him work for every single bit of that he could get. And then you go down the list and you have the other guys. That big block not by block, but that grab by Jeff Holm on the misthrow from Freystetter was just a huge moment in the game, where there goes the Empire D breaking in a point where they, not say gotten stale, but it felt like they were kind of trading, and all of a sudden here comes that break. And then even the start of the game, Mike Drost with those bookends, the goal, and then he also had 2 blocks, not just one, so now he's 3 away from 200. And yeah, it's back breaking how many defenders the Empire have and how they just continue to throw bodies at you. And it really does remind me of like the game of soccer, where over the course of a game, those possession based teams, they wear you down. So by the second half, your legs are just tired because you're working so hard against this unrelenting pressure and this press. And it's very much the same thing with the Empire. You're working so hard that even though Atlanta emotionally, I can tell you on the sideline, emotionally, when they got that break in the third, then they got 2 more. And it felt like they're like, oh, we are still in this. We're pushing. And yet they look down at their legs and they're like, oh, the Empire actually worked us so hard this entire game. That comeback winds up falling short because they emotionally they were there, but they physically just could not get over the hump because the Empire did not change a thing. They just kept going.
The defense just pretty much smothered them for the most part throughout the course of the entire game. They just made Atlanta look awkward at times. They took away their deep game, which they like, and that made them have to really grind for a lot of unders and a lot of extra possession. And it looked like they didn't want to do that, or, they were conscious of being behind. And sometimes when you're behind and you feel like every throw, every cut, every double cut, every triple cut needs to just be that much harder, then you get the disc and, you want to make something happen. But no matter what, you can only score 1 point at a time. And, I think that was why we saw some of those throws that maybe weren't great to the deep space then. And then they got D'd some more, and then the hole gets bigger. And, Atlanta fought back a few times, but the pressure of the defense really, really did it. I mean, Yacht did exactly what he was meant to do back there. He gets 3 great blocks, and then the Empire defense also got to play a little bit. Maybe the coaches have been listening to me. Yeah, they let him cook a little bit, and their D-line offense a few times looked just as good as a lot of other teams' actual offense. Never mind the fact that it's a D-line. They spread the field, they moved the disc well, they scored some relatively easy breaks as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, you say Randolph. We talk about Callahan when it was Randolph, the other one alongside Justin Burnett, and he had, I guess, a quiet game by his standards, but still one of your D line players that was quiet had a goal, an assist, and a block. Had one of each, had a +3, didn't make any mistakes. I mean, even Ben Katz in the game had 2 throwaways, and yet again, what he does on the mark and how hard he made Bobby Lay work. It's almost like I mean, he did his job, right? Like, what is his job? What is Ben Katz's function? It's to give that handler in Bobby Lay the hardest day he possibly had. So he gets a thumbs up there, and then whatever else he gives you is good enough. And he gave you enough in that game. And again, I want to credit Atlanta too, because this is one of those games, I think, big picture wise, with Colorado and Salt Lake, because I just watched that game too the other night. Salt Lake is a gosh darn good team. They are 7-0 as well. They are really good. And I don't know why the Colorado Summit, and everyone questioned this, totally fair. I don't know why Nethercutt played 2 of the first 8 points and started on the D-line. Nobody knows. I think Colorado had beaten Salt Lake every other time, so I think they're experimenting a bit the way Carolina did. Like, Carolina threw that game away to DC because they were experimenting a bit too much in the start of the year. So it's a regular season. You take those L's in that way, and obviously you want the 1 seed, and maybe Colorado are saying, well, Salt Lake, Colorado, I mean, I guess we'll make the trip if we have to, or we'll get them on the second one, but back in Salt Lake. But either way, I think those 2 teams are really, really good. And then you have Atlanta, who's really good. You have Carolina, who we know is capable of being very good. They've got their stars as well. And DC is DC, right? And DC is very good as well. So you do have these top of the teams, and no disrespect to the Central, right? There's Minnesota, whoever comes out of there, whether it's Minnesota at top or if it's Indy who finds their way. But anyway, there are, I'd say, 4 or 5 teams right underneath the Empire in that second tier of saying, if one of those teams upsets the Empire, even DC in the playoffs, right? If it's DC in the playoffs, or it's who knows who it may be, right? But Philly could upset DC. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many permutations. I don't want to throw anybody out, but let's say, yeah, DC have a chance to upset in the playoffs in the East, and then if the Empire do get a championship weekend, it's not to say that last year was a foregone conclusion, but there are teams that could take it to them. There are teams that could give them a run for their money. Like, it's not crazy to say, even after watching that game, that Colorado and Salt Lake, I mean, the Empire, those are not 2 wins. Like, it's more likely that they drop one of those games than not. And yet, when there's no wind, when the conditions are the right way, and when everybody is healthy and clicking, the Empire are in their own tier. That's what it is. It is 1, and then there's 4 or 5 teams that I would not be surprised if they get knocked off. But again, the Empire are the favorite in every game. I didn't break new ground with that statement. Like, I'm not,
Yeah,
I'm
no,
not
no.
the wheel, but it's just, I just want to, my whole point is that Atlanta is very good. Like, they are. Liam Haberfield is a gamer. Max Thorne, Jeremy Langdon, of course, Matt Smith, Eckwurzel, Kenneth Taylor is getting better and better. Justin Burnett is getting better and better. They are that being experienced. I don't say old, they're experienced, but they're also young, and they're athletic, and they have big throws, and they can make big plays, and they're smart, and they run different zones of defense. Like, Atlanta is just a really, really, really solid, good team. And it's just such a compliment to the Empire that they took a very good team with all of those great players, and they just methodically just picked them apart one by one.
Yeah, I will say that I didn't love part of Atlanta's game plan for this. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't love some of that zone. I thought you just let the Empire's best players beat you, which, you know, you got to pick your poison somewhere. But I don't love the idea of a zone and just letting Osgard drop perfect blades all over the place. I also didn't feel like They did a very good job of being aware of when Lithio or Babbitt were cutting deep in certain situations, when it was more man-to-man coverage. I mean, you got to help on that. You either need, somebody peeling off, you need multiple defenders kind of aware of that space so that, sure, if Empire were still to jack it up, maybe Jeff Sky's two people then instead of just one. But when the thrower's holding the disc and they see more defenders there with him, they probably look that off and they probably look to throw it somewhere else and keep grinding for unders and different things. And, that's probably where Atlanta maybe could have gotten a block or two or a miscue rather than just, one-on-one Jeff, sometimes with steps going deep. I mean, I'll bet $1,000 on that every single time. Another thing, Atlanta, John Lithio picks up a lot of those double team discs, and in theory, great if it's maybe a little windier, a little more difficult situations. But after the first time or two where Empire puts Jeff 40 yards across the field and then another player all the way at the back of their own end zone, I mean, Lithio can throw wherever he wants. Atlanta just does not have enough players to cover that space, that doesn't really make a lot of sense once he completes one or two. They weren't even contested really when it got over there. I mean, I guess Jeff made the one good play, but they were just too many options where he could throw the disc. I think, Empire kind of found out a good way to use Lithio to get out of those double teams, especially on a nice night where there's not a lot of wind. So I didn't love that either.
Well, that's another one's examples that against most other teams that you have Freisteider setting up on that, especially those double teams. A lot of times they would make them move, or Holzmeyer, Ramsey. Like, you've giant guys setting up those double teams, and yet Lithio, just, you have a 6'5" guy who can throw over it. And I mean, that's not every team has a 6'5", hammer, not a hammer thrower, but a guy who can throw a hammer like that, 6'5", over a 6'7" guy, right? It's not that's not happening for everybody. It's also just those permutations that that can happen. And then if it was a problem, you also can have Yacht move over, and then Yacht is the one who does the exact same thing, those hammer throws, as he did last year when he was on the O-line.
One other thing about Atlanta's game plan that I didn't really like, or maybe just the team in general that they're going to need to improve on, because they are a very good team, like you said. I mean, they're right there, maybe one half a step below the other best teams in the league. But I mean, they're good. They need to improve their red zone offense. They were not really patient, but I don't know. They didn't seem to have it all figured out. I mean,
the irony is that they were both statistically 11 of 14 on their red zone offense. But to your point, it was, when did they make those mistakes? When did those errors come? And how hard did they have to work for it?
Yeah, it just didn't feel clean. It didn't look smooth. You could tell when they got impatient. And then, they also, I think, got lucky on one or two of their end zone possessions. I think that one throw early in the game
to Taylor that got tipped. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it tipped, but it went over Marquez's shoulder. And I don't think that was the intended receiver. I think they were throwing that to Misha, and it was just a bad throw that got lucky. So I don't know. Even just the dumping and swinging and using of space in the red zone, sometimes they had to go really far back, which, okay, great, you're maintaining possession. But I don't know. I just feel like the real top-level team should have that figured out a little better, or look a little cleaner if they're going to want to take the next step and, win that game, as opposed to keep it close the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, the Empire did a great job, too, of jumping those, hucking lanes, if you will, for Austin Taylor, and saying, okay, what can Bobby Lay beat us with? I mean, everybody's seen Bobby Lay around the league for a long time, whether it was Raleigh or Tampa, or of course with Atlanta now. And obviously he wants that flick huck. He sits on it. He wants it. And the Empire said, we are not going to let him beat us with that. So he got those 3 backhand hucks off. But that's to say they're going to live with it. They are going to live with it, because Atlanta, they were almost slow to react, where even if he got it off and they completed the huck, then one of the teammates was isolated completely upfield. And as you mentioned, even though they got the 50 yards or the 40 yards they wanted, now they're stuck upfield. They have one player stuck upfield now to get into this helter-skelter red zone offense, and the Empire D did not allow that to happen. As you mentioned, on that stand that Austin Taylor winds up getting, I think I counted 15 throws before they finally got that, as you said, fortunate goal that, again, for the unintended receiver. The last thing I think I want to talk about with this game is what I think we're going to continue to see. I want to see how you weigh in on this. That game was really physical. And when we talk about ultimate in general, and I think there's different levels of ultimate, ultimate with referees in the AUDL, like it's the same. It feels like the same game. It feels like the same rules. But because of the way that the athleticism that is now on display in the league, and just the way that these gentlemen are built differently than you and I playing, summer league now, right? Or whatever it is. Like that game was really physical. And I don't know what the refs do about that kind of physicality when it all started with Babbitt and St. John's, like right in the first quarter. And St. John's comes back to the Atlanta sideline, and he is frustrated. He's saying, why did the refs not, like, he is just like, his body is physically like all over me, but he wasn't. Babbitt was boxing him out, and that is just, Babbitt is a big man, and St. John's is a big guy, and Eckworth is a big guy, and Holzmeyer is a big guy, and they're moving with such speed and such force that, yeah, there's going to be physicality. It's going to happen. And there were some bag plays there, like the Weinberg, Kobira stuff. Like there are 50-50 where you can watch the replay and have your opinion and things like that. But I mean, it is a tough task for these referees. And I felt like they tried their best over the course of that game to, kind of let them play and trust that these players, having played this game for 15, 20 years, in some cases, that they trusted these players to, not take it too far. Right. And I do think games like this, that are, I mean, both these teams, again, if you want to win a title, you win games like this. You prove it to everybody that you can take down the Empire, who have won 24 at home at that point, now 25. And if you're the Empire, you don't let somebody break that streak. You don't let somebody take one off you at home. And so the physicality just gets up and up and up. And I guess for you and everyone else has to ask themselves, they're asking this, is it too much? Is this physicality too much? Again, for me, from the sideline, I just think it's a lot of big bodies knocking into each other. And that's what you're going to get at this kind of level. And I think the referees did as good as they could do. But I totally understand how both sidelines at the end of it are like, I mean, it was more of a physical fight than it should have been.
Maybe you had a better perspective of it being on the sideline. And it wasn't something I had texted any of the guys on the team about afterwards. The game didn't strike me as overly physical. I mean, a few plays, people are always kind of be bouncing off Jeff a little bit because he's really broad. He's not gigantic tall, but he's a broad guy, and I feel like he actually plays pretty safe compared to how big he is. I don't really remember him clobbering anybody in the last 5-6 years.
Nope. Except poor Mike Ross one time.
Yeah, well, we got some pictures in group chats where Mike's just getting horribly skied by Jeff, and you can see Mike just he's going to be upset that I mentioned this, but that's all right. Love you, Mike.
Of all the players, I remember him getting the worst of it. Like when he wanted to come down.
Well, when you're a really, really good defender and you get yourself close enough to the plays to make them, but then Jeff flies in out of nowhere to actually make the plays, sometimes you're going to end up looking bad on the poster. But to his credit, Mike would have gotten those Ds if Jeff wasn't there, because I think he still beat the other player. Yeah.
If not for Jeff Babbitt, Mike Drowse would be at 200 blocks already.
That's actually very accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of the rest of the game didn't seem like crazy physical to me. I was always one of the smaller players on the field, and every once in a while I'd get somebody much bigger than me covering me and, bumping me a little bit, or, trying to hold me back when I started to move because I was maybe a little quicker than them. It's just, I feel like, in a club game, maybe you and your opponent, you find that like neutral ground that you're both okay with, because maybe you can call a foul or two, or even just say to them, like, hey, I might start calling that, like that kind of thing. In the AUDL, obviously you can't, but I don't know. That game didn't strike me as particularly aggressive or anything out of the norm. So it's interesting to hear that from your perspective. I thought they weren't like bumping each other on the marks too much. There were hardly any throwing fouls that I can think of.
There was a bit of grabbing behind the play. Like Jack knows he's going to get touched every time, and Jack is one of the best in the entire league. Like if you just watch Jack throughout plays, his defenders put their hands on him as he's beginning his jump cuts, like his world famous jump cuts. The defenders have their hands on him more than any other player, maybe in the whole league. Like they are just things. I think there's a lot of hand touching. It's interesting when you compare the divisions as well, because again, officials in the East Division are kind of doing those games, and so the East Division kind of has different referees sometimes. And I think in the Central you get a lot of touching of handlers. They kind of it's really physical in that way, and they kind of let those things go. In the East, it's not over aggressive, but Jack knows that he's going to get touched, and it's so interesting to watch Jack kind of it seems like it's just a fly, or it's just a thing that he's not bothered by, right? Like he'll look over occasionally, but I mean, he just kind of allows the defenders to touch him, knowing that he's not going to get a call, knowing that it doesn't matter. And I think like Elliott got a bit frustrated in that game because they were touching him a bit more than they usually do. And I noticed this year too, a credit to Elliott Chartok, teams are definitely being more physical with him this season and putting their hands on him a bit more before he begins his dump cuts. And you can see he kind of pushes them away and he doesn't get the call because it's happening off the disc, right? And we're a lot of times, I think too, yes, it was my perspective on the sideline, but a lot of times we're just watching the disc and we're like, okay, what physicality was there on the disc, on the mark, or as the guy's catching it? Is there something? Is he running into him or whatever? But to me, that game was physical off the mark, off the disc, and what was kind of happening everywhere else. Where I'm watching just Jack and I'm like, oh, like is Jack being quiet or no? Like Justin Burnett is being physical with him. Also, is a good enough athlete to just be with him step for step. So it's like even if Jack finds space that he usually gets, then Burnett is also right there. But Burnett is also using his physicality to stay close to him. And that's just what I felt like it was. It was just like, to your point too, as I said, I'm going to kind of double down in that when you have St. John's and Eckwurzel, like those are wide guys. Like if Eckwurzel and Yacht both go for a disc, how is Yacht going to get that disc on the D, right? It's either going to have to be above him using his height, or he's going to have to find a way to get his long arms almost around him. And to get around St. John's, to get around Eckwurzel, to get around Babbitt, the guys, their arms aren't that long. Ultimate is for lanky people, sure, but there's no lanky to get around those wide-bodied guys. And again, to the same point about even Holzmeier, like Holzmeier's he's a big guy. Like you cannot get around him or make a play on the disc without, not to say going through him, but without there being some kind of physicality. Now, I think the last thing to do though, real quick, is we've already kind of previewed Boston. We already saw that one, but to me, I guess for better or worse, silver lining is that we haven't really seen the Boston Glory against the Empire, like 8-6, whatever, up in Boston. But this Friday at home, and as you know, the big question with Boston is who will be there, who will make the trip, who will be in attendance, and really who is Boston? Because Boston right now is still 4-2. They're still technically second in the division, but there is a path with their schedule coming up with New York, with DC. There's a path for them to certainly pick up the L's in the coming weeks and find themselves in a fight. We'll see. Philadelphia beating Carolina was huge for them. I mean, that was gigantic for the rest of their schedule because now, not to say it's easier, but they started with 2 of 4 against the Empire, and those are 2 of their losses. So now Philly, they have to say, hey, Boston, we might be coming for you.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited about the Boston matchup. Hopefully we'll get another nice weather night where the Empire offense can put on a show and you'll just kind of see what they have against another okay defense. And for Boston, I mean, they definitely have the talent on offense to hang with Empire for a while. So I would really like to see how that goes. The first game we talked about was windy, rainy, horrible. So it was just like a whole different type of ultimate. So yeah, I'd love to see both teams at full strength, just see how the matchups pan out.
Well, of course, that will be at 7 p.m. Friday night, not Saturday, Friday night at Joseph F. Field against Boston. And then again, the next one after that is the 30th against DC. And then the next one after that is that road trip, Colorado and Salt Lake 2 weeks later. So they do have a break in between. And then they finish up, with Montreal at home. So we are now certainly in the back half. 7-0 means you got 5 left to go. And we're at that part of the season where I think we kind of know who everybody is. And all these teams have figured out who they are. And we know who the contenders are. We know who maybe aren't. And I think Boston is one of those rare few teams who we don't truly know who they are, even though we're 7 or now going to be 8 weeks into the season. So, yeah, that certainly would be the things that we want to know and want to see. And who doesn't love a New York Boston rivalry? So I think that'll be exciting to see. We'll see you there, 7 p.m. Joseph F. Field on Friday night. So for Matt and then myself, we'll see you soon.